In this movie, I'm going to explain the purpose of interaction sequence diagrams, usually referred to just as sequence diagrams. Sequence diagrams are part of a family of diagrams that can be used to model the interaction in a system, including communication diagrams, timing diagrams, and interaction overview diagrams. Sequence diagrams and communication diagrams model the same dynamic view of the system. We tend to use them for slightly different purposes because of the way they're laid out on the page. So why would you produce sequence diagrams in a project, and what value do they deliver? In summary, the reasons would be to provide a view of the interactions within the system at a variety of levels, to support use cases by detailing the detailed interaction from a design perspective, to explore alternative scenarios in more detail, and to analyze the interaction that occurs in the system during tests. I'm going to look at each of these in turn. Sequence diagrams are used to model interaction between different elements of the system. Those elements can be high-level, like components or subsystems within the system. For example, you might model the interaction between clients and a server in this way, or between the sensors, controller, and devices in the home automation system. They can also be used to model the interaction between active objects, objects that run on their own thread of control and that communicate with one another by message passing. Often they're used to analyze the interaction within use cases, particularly where use cases are used to organize the incremental implementation of the system. They can also be used at the level of operations, where the invocation of an operation on one object results in complex interaction with linked objects. Where sequence diagrams are used with use cases, they can be used to analyze the interaction between the user and the system through the user interface, showing the events that take place at the interface. Or they can be used to show the interaction within the use case in response to events such as the user clicking the Submit or OK button, modeling the interaction that takes place in response. Use cases help the analyst to think through all the alternative pathways through an interaction, that is, all the valid and exceptional scenarios. Sequence diagrams show the interaction involved in much more detail, including the interactions between objects in the system, rather than just between the system and the user. This can be done by producing different sequence diagrams for each scenario. Or it's possible to show alternative and optional paths through a single use case using what are called combined fragments. Some tools allow the developer to capture the actual interaction that goes on when the program runs in the form of a stack trace, and then convert this stack trace into a sequence diagram that shows what happened. This can be very useful for debugging programs, although these can get very large very quickly and are best used for self-contained test cases. So in this movie, we've looked at the purpose of sequence diagrams and the role they play in helping the designer and developer to understand how elements of the system will interact with one another, whether at the architectural level of components and subsystems, or at the detailed level of interaction within a use case.